This is Mick Gillette.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Nate Boyer.
This is Hilliard Guest.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Rob Bell.
This is J.R. Robinson.
This is Dan Stone.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, I'm Mark Valley.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
My name is Justin Jampol. I am the executive director of the Venda Museum of the Cold War here in Culver City, and you're on the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero, Mark Valley, and Pete A. Turner.
Nice, really nice. I'm Mark Valley. We have Justin Jampol here. I'll give you a little bit of a background. I was thinking maybe we could talk about you for a second. I'll give you like a great little bio that I pulled off.
I love to talk about me.
We're going to talk about you. I'm going to read about you first. Then we'll talk about the Venda Museum. Then maybe something about the Cold War Museum. And then we just kind of, once we get that out of the way, we can kind of riff on whatever else we find interesting. Like me, for example. But let's get started. Justin Jampol is a PhD executive director, the founder of the Venda Museum in Culver City, Los Angeles. Justin is the founder, executive director. His work focuses on visual cultural studies and the connection between contemporary art and Cold War iconography. I don't know what iconography is. I think it's something to do with the pictures.
It's a fancy word.
It's a fancy word. A Los Angeles native. You're from Los Angeles, right?
Born and raised, right?
What part of Los Angeles did you go?
Cheviot Hills, so just 5-10 minutes away, yeah.
That's one of those places you see on the way to the airport, but you don't really...
you never stop. You don't want to get stuck there.
There's oil derricks and stuff around.
No, that's actually where I live now. I live right next to one of those, in fact, which explains a lot. The fumes have done something. But no, I grew up next to a park, which is a lot nicer than where we live now.
So Jampol studied at UCLA before earning his doctoral degree in modern history at Oxford University. That's that online university? Oxford University?
Oxnard, and I just changed a letter. Yeah.
That's great, yeah. Let's see. The curator of several exhibitions, Jampol's also produced 2 documentary films on the Cold War, which I want to talk to you later, as well as urban art programs, including the Wall Project. His work has been featured in The Atlantic, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Los Angeles Times, New York Times. He's the author of Beyond the Wall, Art and Artifacts from the GDR, published by Taschen in December of 2014. And here we are.
Well, I got to edit that. That's long. Wow.
You've done a lot of stuff since then, too, haven't you?
Yeah. That's a little, that's a little out of date. But you know what? It's fine because I peaked then. It's all been that was the peak, and it's all been downhill since. It's been downhill since then.
I love that when you go back and you read over your old bio, and you're like, oh God, no.
Let that go. I was in that show.
All city defense for the basketball team.
Yeah, why is that in there still?
You gotta let that go. Some stuff you just gotta let it go.
Yeah. No, I'm holding on to everything.
So anyway, the Venda Museum. Let's talk a bit about that. This is something that you started. You founded it. From what I know, it's not just a museum. It's the largest collection in the world of East German and Cold War artifacts. You kind of got an interest in it when you were in Germany after the wall came down. It's not only a museum, but it's also a collection-based research and education institute as well. It preserves Cold War artifacts, and you're going to be transitioning into a Cold War museum. And tell us a little bit about how you started this. You're the founder. How'd you do that? Let's break it down.
Well, and I should make it clear at the start. I don't do any of the fun stuff now that I used to do when the museum first began. And, that's the ironic twist to all this is whenever you start anything, you do it because of the mission, because of the project, and all those things are still great, but you become less hands-on. So in the very beginning, I was going down bunkers and finding stuff in basements and attics, and, it's like I'm far away. I mean, I'd hurt myself if I did that now. Right. But, it's also kind of like the job is now that the museum has grown. As you mentioned, we're just on the verge of a big move. And so, it involves a lot of organizational admin sort of work, but at the heart of it still is this collection. It's 100,000 items, all Cold War materials, busts of Lenin, artwork, archives, artifacts of all different types.
Flags, clothes, toys, furniture.
Yeah, and it's the diversity of the collection that also makes it I think on the one hand very interesting because we don't just do paintings on the wall, nor do we do just books and stuff like that. But it's all these things together. I mean, we really specialize in what I call like orphaned objects. These are things that don't belong in any other kind of place. And I think for a small museum like us, it means that we really punch above our weight, because I think that the kind of impact we have is of a level of I would like to think of a much bigger institution than we are. But I think it's because not a lot of people, no one's as nuts as we are to do this kind of thing. That's like the worst business model ever. I mean, we have to, where it's all grant based. It's a 501c3, so we beg for money. But I think that we do a lot of good with it. I mean, we are one of the few places in the world that invites people from all walks of life to really dive into the collection. Filmmakers, scholars, artists, and anybody who wants to see what the collection is about. And I want to point out that when the museum moves at the end of this year, so in the fall, we're going to take that ethos there. We're going to have an open storage system. We're going to invite people from, to come see what's in the collection rather than, most museums, they show like 2 or 3%.
What's an open storage system?
So open storage is basically like a new model for museums in trying to address this issue of like most cool stuff is behind closed doors, right? So you have a situation where people show 2% of their collection that's on the walls, but all the stuff is in their archives, on shelves, in boxes, and we wanted to sort of reverse that. We wanted to take, the Cold War is known for being opaque and hard to get at and secrets, and we want to kind of turn that on its head. We want this to be transparent and open and engaging, and so part of that is trying to take the kind of traditional museum model and making the collection available for the public so they can see what's in what we have. We're not going to be able to put on 100%, but a majority of the collection will be in a publicly accessible space.
We could jump into the Cold War Museum a little bit, like how things are going to be changing in terms of your size. Are you still going to be collecting? You're still collecting artifacts? You're still trying to bring stuff in?
Yeah, I mean, we still bring stuff in. It's not at the pace that it was in the beginning for obvious reasons. I mean, this stuff is becoming history, in a way that it wasn't 12 years ago when the museum began. In fact, that's the reason why it began. It's like, look, we've got a window of opportunity here to get our hands on this stuff while we can. And we, as a people, often are late to the game, like as a world culture, we say, oh, wait, no, this stuff is important. We should collect it. And by then it's too late, or, you kind of miss the boat on that. So the idea was to do it while we can. We do collect in terms of, I think we're opportunistic. We look at collections that are available that come along. We collect materials in response to a particular show we're doing or an exhibit. But once in a while, you get surprises. We've gotten spy equipment that shows up here with just the name, I was supposed to burn this on the day the wall fell, and I didn't. And, we have audio reels that we still have to digitize that are from the Stasi. So there are so many things to go through here. And I think it's a reminder, not only of why this is an exciting project, but, like 25 years ago when the wall fell, I mean, it's nothing in the grand human history. I mean, it just happened. So we still have to sift our way through it. And what it also means is we don't have the kinds of control that you get 30, 40 years later. And what I mean by that is like when the history is still being worked out, we're not sure yet kind of what's still out there, what's not. And in fact, I have gotten several calls from Customs, Homeland Security saying like, oh, it's really, really good that you do what you do, or else you'd be arrested several times over, because people would send this stuff, right? And we didn't know what it was. And it'd be like a landmine or, ammo clips, stuffed in with consumer products or whatever it is, because we can't control that. People send us all kinds of things. So it's always a bit of a surprise here.
When you get things sent to you, it seems like you might lose context. So like if it's in some attic in some German town and everything, how do you maintain the context to understand that this log cabin syrup can actually means something more than just, hey, this is an old neat thing?
It's a great question. And, in one way, decontextualization can be a powerful thing in that, for example, when we brought over the segments of the wall, it's the longest stretch of the wall in the world outside of Berlin. That's here on
Wilshire.
And it's 26 tons and 40 feet long of the wall. And we didn't just want to do kind of like a recreation. We wanted to have it as an LA thing, as an installation. We made it for like a canvas for street artists. And on the one hand, it breathes new life into it to have that sort of distance so that it's not only this one thing that occurred in this particular time and place and it's locked there. On the other hand, for people that are using the materials as sources, it's super important to know the context. And I think we go out of our way to try to capture as much of that as we can. For example, I mean, even the metrics of the, cost, where we got it from, how much did we pay if we did? I mean, that tells you a lot about something, because you look over time, the last 12 years that the museum has been around, you have certain things that rise and fall, and it shows the demand or not in a lot of cases. No one's sort of like melting bronze busts down anymore as they were, because
but some of the collectors in your short documentary, it was Collecting Memories, was that the name of it?
Collecting Fragments,
and the pickers that you had was like American pickers, but it was over in East Germany. There seemed to be like one of them seemed to be a little more interested in it for like the cultural aspect,
right.
And then there was one guy who seemed a little more interested in just its monetary value.
Yeah, money. Look, you come across, and that's the thing, right? You come across people of all different sorts, and like we're not buying things from Christie's or fancy auctions. These are people who are on the ground, who are oftentimes like scavengers, who like grabbed onto these things while they could. And they tended to be people who were on the margins of society at that time, and still kind of are. You know what I mean? They never kind of.
What was the job of that one guy who was riding the motorcycle in the opening? He had
Alvin.
Some kind of
yeah. He was like in a Bulgarian jail for 5 years. He's actually one of the few. He was from the West and tried to move to the East. Probably one of the very few.
Right.
And he had a small kid. He couldn't afford rent. And one day he went on to the East and was like, "I want to join you guys." And they're like, No. And they like turned him around and said no. They were like mystified. Like,
that's funny. Why are you
like,
doing
why
this?
are you here? And they're like, sure, he was a spy or something. But yeah, I mean, these guys are characters, and it's also you work with people who other museums probably wouldn't, because they don't know about them. They're unusual people oftentimes, but you get an amazing amount of information. So the context question is like key here, because you get people who are, rather than just sort of like buying things as you find them or you accept them as they arrive or they come, but like a lot of these guys are their heart and soul is in it, or they've lived it, so they know exactly where this thing was and who bought it and for what price and where to get more of them if there are any, and you should talk to this guy. And there's a lot of sort of being on the ground and really being there. And as I said, this is the kind of work that I did a lot more of than I do now. Now we have a system of scouts that go out and do this kind of work, but you gotta have the nose for this kind of thing, and you just have to be up for it too, because there's some strange stuff out there.
Yeah. So what do you have in common with any of these pickers, any of these guys that you met?
Well, so I mean, as you mentioned, they all get involved in it for really different reasons, right? I mean, there are some of them that are interested in the history, some of them that are out for money, but I think when it comes down to it, I mean, I think it's still kind of a wild east. There's not any really clear idea yet of kind of where this will land, what the storyline will be. Mm-hmm. And I think that what you do get, I mean, the guys with the money part are a lot more of the straightforward ones. It's really the guys that are out to tell a story or to defend a particular position that things get tricky and difficult. For example, the border guards. We have one of the largest collection here in the world from the border guards in the East. And these are people who are trying to defend, their life's work, which was defending a border, which is a border which was hard to defend.
Yeah.
This is we can all pretty much agree that the wall, was a good thing that it came down in 89, and these guys have their, it was their life's work, and
it's their purpose. Yeah.
It's their purpose, and so our job is to really record these stories, to understand where they're coming from. Not that we have to agree with them, but to record it because I think it's important for the human story, right? Like all the stories that we tell ourselves and others, why do we do the things we do, and how do we explain that? I think that's a fascinating question. And I think ultimately, if we're doing our job here at the museum, we are getting at the essence of what it means to be human. This is Cold War Eastern Europe, which is the collection is the focus of. This is a case study for what people do under certain conditions, and we should be able to extract an essence of that, and we should be able to kind of apply that to us. Like, for example, what do we keep? What do we throw away?
Yeah,
like, how do we
in a way, I guess
yeah.
the Venda Museum, or that time period, was like it was like a tectonic shift of civilization. So in that little gap, you can kind of examine some of the strata and figure out what really goes into making, like an individual, who they are, how they identify themselves and what they do,
and what happens when it all falls apart.
Yeah,
you've created an identity for yourself, and that's who you are. Then all of a sudden, one day to the next, your life means something different. You have stories. We came across people all the time, and you might have seen this in the film. Like, they were the head honcho in some town, or they were a member of the secret police, and then the next day they're a security guard or a janitor or something. So there is huge identity crisis issues.
I went to see one of the higher Stasi. He was a colonel, but he'd given quite a few interviews around the time that I don't know, all this like WikiLeaks came out. But anyway, first I'd gone to Hohenschönhausen, and I looked at some of the interrogation rooms, and they always had a desk, and they had a little desk in front of it. I don't know if you noticed.
Yeah,
you noticed
yeah,
that, right?
no, I know exactly what you're talking
about.
The
Unterschrift, or whatever.
Exactly.
It's like the underdesk, right?
Yeah.
And I went to this guy's office, and it was in I think it was the Deutsche Zeitung, or what is it was a newspaper that.
Süddeutsche Zeitung?
It was the Deutsche Zeitung. It was like the newspaper of East Germany.
Neues Deutschland.
Yeah. They got the beautiful kind of modern building that they haven't really touched. The brass is still a little staining, but and they have one of those elevators where you just walk into the elevator. There's no doors. Yeah, and it just kind of goes up.
I know exactly.
But I went into his office, and I sat down to talk to him, and it was the same size and the same way interrogation room.
Yep.
Was set up.
Yeah,
the desk was exactly the same.
I'll tell you something nuts. So, like, a lot of these guys, they adhere still to the power structure that they were brought up in. So they live in the same places that they always had, with the same stuff, in the same way, the same ritual. And oftentimes, like, when we talk to them, like, we find a border guard and we say, hey, we want to speak to you. We want to sit down with you and hear your story, or, we want to hear if you have any collections or anything. They'll often seek the guidance or the approval from their superior, even though there is no more wall anymore. There's no superior.
Sure, yeah.
But they like kind of keep the system. And a lot of these guards, by the way, the wall came down in November 9th, 89. A lot of them continue to show up for work every single day until, basically until the very, very end.
Oh, yeah, they were still there
until,
because I used to just drive through. We'd kind of wave to them like in 1990.
But it's not. It's crazy. That they were still there, and it gives you some insight into these people and their, in their worlds. Like, so, for example, we have here at the museum, there are these reports that the border guards put together, like issue reports, and basically, like, if there was something that happened at the wall, they would record it. Like, one person looked suspicious or fishy and was standing at the wall, and then they would log it, and so that's what we have here. But after the wall fell, they continued to do these issue reports, but the reports would be like, 10,000 people crossed the border illegally today because there was like this idea that there was a border. It was like there was no visa. The people were like
communism ends as we know it.
You just drove by and waved to them, and they'd be like, "Oh, another one crossed illegally today."
Yeah, American soldier crosses freely into Germany. Yeah.
So, but I mean, again, I think we have to be careful here because I think this is what makes it so effective as a case. That. They were.
What happens when your things that support your own identity become obsolete?
Right.
Yeah, and what more of a potent example of this than East Berlin in '89, and and there's you can compare it to a West because there's like another half, right? Yeah. So it's just a very productive place to look to dive in.
I just thought they have the show Hoarders.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think that you should be a guest on Hoarders.
Awesome, thanks, Mark. Yeah,
kind of like
that's what I aspire
to. It's like a positive example. They could just do one of you because you mentioned
just hoard the right stuff.
Just hoard the right stuff. Start a museum. Yeah. Don't fill your trailer. Up to 10 feet high.
But there's the other part of that story, which is that there's like the overdosing on stuff too. Like for example,
how do you know the difference? So I've heard you say that before. You said something like, well, we collected this. I think when you're in a barn, you're like, well, this is not really what we're looking for. But I was thinking, that is the difference between you and a hoarder. Right.
Well, I mean, I hope there's more than just that, but I'll grab on it.
The place is pretty clean.
That's
here,
nothing
though.
to do with me, by the way. But yeah, like for example, at my house, like I literally have a sofa and that's it. And it was probably more extreme now because of this place, because there is so much stuff that I've gone the other way. Like I don't have a single thing on the walls in my own house, and it wasn't always that way. But I think I've kind of got to a place too where I was surrounded by things so much at work. I just wanted kind of like a clean space. No, but you have to be careful when you take stuff on. I mean, for example, one of the people that we work with here at the museum will say like, is it, even when people want to give us an item or thing, like, is it free like a beer or free like a puppy? The idea that like you have to keep caring for this thing, right? Yeah. And like this stuff, you have to keep caring for it. You can't just put it in a box somewhere. It's like there's a huge, like, when you look at everything, when you extrapolate the cost of acquisition, of accessioning it, of cataloging, of photographing it, putting on the online, moving it, insuring it, maintaining it, conserving it, it's a tremendous cost. So now it's like after the initial whirlwind, and our great collections are from that time, but it happened very, very fast. We're like, oh yeah, that's amazing. Let's get that. Mm-hmm. We've had to be very thoughtful and strategic on how we grow the collection. So even now, a majority of the things that they'll be in touch and say like, oh, I've got this amazing collection of like East German soaps, whatever it is. They're like, no, thank you. No, that's really great. Sometimes they'll get in touch and it's totally amazing. We had a former ambassador give protest posters to us when they were protesting outside his embassy, and they're like amazing signs. Like, great, we'll take those. Mm-hmm. But most stuff we have to say, thanks, but no thanks, because it's like a puppy.
Go ahead. Did you know how to make a museum before, like when you started this? I mean, because you can get a degree in that, but ultimately, like as you gather these pieces, I'm looking right now at a display case, and each display case has got to be a couple $100 to assemble, put on the wall, make all these things that you never consider, and then like, okay, this is kind of a cultural, social exposition, right? So you've got to have people that are specialized in that to pull more context out.
It. I mean, that's really what my job is now, right? Finding other people that know what they are doing. So you can find, we work with people that are from the art world or the conservator world, or, and that's not my world, as you've said, and in fact, pretty soon I'm going to be banned from my own museum because I go downstairs and are like, oh, you have to wear the white gloves to go through the art, and they're like, go away, because they know when I've been there, because when I got into it, like I didn't have white gloves, I didn't go through it, and I would look. There's no blueprint for this, right? No, I don't know what I'm doing. But that's healthy. That's healthy. I never wanted to be the kind of institution that was too afraid to look at itself and say, why are we here? A lot, our mission statement has changed like 4 times in the past 12 years. A lot of the traditional foundations would look at that and say, that shows weakness. I say it shows strength. I mean, the fact is that the world, it does change, and how we perceive it does change. So being flexible, being on our toes, we need to do that. We need to question that all the time. And no, I mean, a lot of the things that makes this museum very special, we're not sort of in some grand plan kind of way. I mean, it's trial and error. And a lot. I mean, you fail. And I think you learn a lot from that. We talk about it all the time. Our exhibits should take big risks. That's why we're here. We're not the Getty. We don't have the resources of them. And if we did things the way that they do, we're the worst of both worlds. We're a big behemoth and we don't have the money. You know what I mean? Like, act like that. And so we're like, look, let's take risks. And I think our shows have been, again, in the last few years, our curating team with Hughes here has been amazing. Where our last show had invited people to look at everything through different lenses. So, for example, we had different plaques for everything with different perspectives on it. So all the information, the facts were all there and right. But the whole idea was to invite people to see it through a totally different light depending on which plaque they read. And that's something that museums usually say, this is the way that it is, and this is the way you should see the thing. And that's not what this place is about. And it kind of goes to the point of this history that's changing. So, we want to be able to engage people and say, look, this is what we know so far. Here are some different ideas, and what do you think?
Yeah. I get a question like with the different, I went to they had a Russian military museum in Berlin over in the eastern part. I forget where it is, but I remember going to that, and it had a completely different. Obviously, the little plaques are completely different than the ones they had on the western side. But what was is there a sort of irony? It always seemed to me that communism and this kind of new political order, that this was like the New Testament of politics, that we don't need to pay attention to everything that happened in the past. And what was the DDR's relationship with history and keeping their own objects and museums? Did they want to preserve their own history while they were still vital?
Well, of course. I mean, we all do. I mean, that's what government institutions are all about, is telling the narrative of that particular country or state, or inevitably, of course, it's also reflective of the people in charge.
Right.
So in the DDR, you had a situation where they were telling stories to their citizens in a way that underscored or aligned with their own story of how they claim legitimacy. And in that particular case, it was about West Europe being influenced by United States, that East Germany was the inheritor of true German culture. This was the land of Bach. That the West was the result of the legacy of fascism, that capitalism was at the root of it. And that's why you get not only museum exhibits, but even textbooks in the East that say about World War II that we won. Well, how is that? Well, because there's this implicit deal that if you're East German, you are socialists, and it was socialism that
fought against
fascists. So there's all of this sort of like this shell game going on, and that was really reflected in these places. But the problem is with museums. The problem is with museums, especially those that are trying to emphasize the narrative of a country, is that changes, and what happens to those collections when the storyline is altered. And oftentimes you'll have we'll get word of oh, there's a museum of education in the East. Well, it's filled with stuff about how students were trained, but it was bogus. It was never effective. It was brainwashing. But it's and so they're we're getting rid of this stuff. But I'm wait, no. that's fascinating, right? I mean, how does that happen? How are people sort of trying to be trained and it's the same thing. I mean, you can look across the board. Why are some artworks preserved and some not? Why are some buildings kept and some not? And it's a very political and difficult question. Is that because it's all about now forming the new storyline of what happened? And so you can't have, this is a very German thing, but they'll have like commissions to figure this stuff out. And they'll say things like that building has to go because of a conflict of meaning. That will literally be the reason, because it conflicts with the storyline that they're trying to tell. Yeah. And that's an amazing thing. I mean, as a historian, that's what drew me to this topic in the first place, these kind of questions.
But on a personal level, right? I mean, how do people deal with how do they deal with their stuff? I mean, some people obviously save it, right? But in East Germany, you said a lot of people were just throwing everything away.
I mean, look, there wasn't only a political change. There was a material change, right? People were throwing out things from one life and buying things and replacing them from another, you know, a kind of like newly created identity. And so, a lot of this stuff went away. And it does make you think again on the human level, like we all in some ways curate our own lives. I think like why do we keep certain things and why do we throw away others, you know? And I think that what we found time and time again is like if people didn't want to be reminded of something, they threw it away or they got rid of it. If they were proud of it, they kept it. And so you have this interesting situation by which like that over time, you know, you had to basically like consumer items that a lot of them detested or didn't want anything to do with anymore have like vanished, even though there were at one time many of them. And I mean, it does feel again on the human level like that they wanted to be able to tell other people, and they would do this to me all the time when I sat down, like, here's my life. I want to tell you my life. And here are the things I can show to you that prove that this is the way that it was. Like somehow suggesting that these things have objective truth embedded in them. Yeah. You know, that this was evidence.
It's a strange feeling because I felt when I first came here, or even when I first met you, I felt like I have a collection of stuff from Berlin, right? We have and I felt like, oh, this stuff just kind of sits, like everybody collects things. And a lot of people don't talk about what they collect. You know, you find out as you get to know somebody, like,
it's a
you got a crazy butterfly collection. You know, it's like,
do you have a butterfly collection?
I don't. But I was going to ask if you did.
We can exchange some samples.
I got a great one. I specialize with the monarchs.
Monarchs, yeah.
But I felt this, and you probably experienced it because I want to talk a little bit about this historical witness program that you have. Yeah. But I felt this thing like, oh wow, all this stuff that I have, right, that I've been carrying along. I felt like I wanted to tell you my experience.
Yeah.
Because of a museum, because of a place that's it's a center that understands it. You know, do you find that with people who are just like, is it they want to unburden themselves? Do they want to share their story?
Great question.
What is it?
I mean, I think, I think, first of all, things can be burdensome things too, right? There are so many things that people have that they don't necessarily want but can't throw away. And I think it's a metaphor in some ways for our own past, right? Like there is some stuff that especially people who come here have been through a lot. I mean, for those who were divided by the wall or came from the East, there is this sense of something that they don't necessarily have a chance to address in everyday life. And then they come here and it opens up this box where they've put all of that into. And so coming to the museum, you do get the sense of opening the box. We've had some really, really profound and emotional responses to people who have been here. And Mark, I'm not surprised at all that you had that feeling too. And you have a strong personal connection to that part of the world, but it was also that time in your life. Like it sounds like that was a pivotal time in your life. And so when people come here, I mean, we had there was a Academy Award winning film several years ago called The Lives of Others. It was a great film by East Block. And we were somewhat involved in the film. We hosted the the Oscar party here, the press conference for it, and Ulrich.
Hey everybody, this is John.
And this is Pete.
You know what we do?
What do?
We tell stories.
We sure do.
And you should tell your story. You should tell the story of your company, your organization,
Your life.
and what makes you special at what you do.
Write that book by talking it out.
That's right. Talk it out. Chapters in podcast form.
Yes. And how would you do that if you didn't know what to do?
You would call John and Pete.
What? Yes.
You
yes,
would call
should.
John and Pete. Where do they call us?
Well, you can go to breakitdownshow.com for one.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you can enter a comment, or you could go to Twitter at
JohnLG69.
and I'm at Pete A. Turner on Twitter. Say, hey, help me tell stories. Tell me where to go. Go to the website. See where we have our classes on how to do podcasting. It's all there. It's all available. It's all right now.
Break it down.
The Oscar party here, the press conference for it, and Ulrich Mühe, who was kind of the star of that film, was actually was a border guard in the East, and he had found out later that his wife had been spying on him, so he spent the day here, and he was totally moved. I mean, you could just see that, like, there was something that touched him. And I'm not even saying it was like, oh, he was moved in a great way and loved the museum. Like, it was not. It was just. It wasn't that at all. I mean, it was just kind of like reconnecting to this lost past. And even though he had done this film on the area, it's like somehow it felt so alive and real to him. And then he died not long after that. I mean, he was already very sick. But you just see like glimpses into people's personal lives that you would otherwise not see. And it's actually one of the fascinating parts of my job.
This is an interesting thing, too, because again, it gets back to context. And you had earlier said, like, oh, that wasn't effective, so, it didn't count, like, from the story you told us. But the affect part, when the person's like, yeah, I hated this particular thing, but I had to keep it because it had such an impact on my life. How do you take that to someone? How do you present that to someone who doesn't have a direct connection to that world? Maybe they're too young to to know what it is. What do you? And this is LA, so the show. How do you figure out how to maximize that so someone comes through and they feel that affect?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's first of all, that's going back to that question of why we're here, right, and not there, because we didn't just want to make this like about something that happened 25 plus years ago, thousands of miles away from where we are. That it's like it's our job to find the connective tissue and extract that experience from a collection, an artwork, in an exhibit, a program, that has some sort of bearing or provokes some kind of response from people who ordinarily and most likely have never even been to that part of the world, that don't know anything about it. But what I find so powerful about the subject is that these are very understandable, like what I call, there are a lot of handlebars to get on this bike, right? You can grab onto it in all different kinds of ways, right? Like the Berlin Wall. Well, yes, there is a wall, but there's also walls, plural, right? And there's socioeconomic walls, there are political walls, there are physical walls. I mean, that's something, right? It's in the news all the time these days. Surveillance, spying, art and politics, how those come together or clash or not. So there are so many ways to get at this material. And, those topics are incredibly provocative. And in fact, I think in terms of our audiences, as we're preparing to move to our new site and, who's going to come there. And even at the place where we are now, we started off skewing from people that are older who remember, remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, and this was very much a part of their lives, and we certainly have people that engage with the collection who remember this time, but our number one demographic is women between the ages of 25 and 34. And I think, and without being too being able to be very explicit or specific about why that is, I just think it speaks to the subject itself and how expansive it is, and how many different ways there are to engage with some of these themes. I mean, this is strong stuff.
Like at other museums, a lot of times where I can't help but I'm compelled being drawn in is like when I see uniforms, right? Like I'm a service member, marksman of the Army as well, and you see that uniform, and you're like, gosh, someone like me wore that, and look how tiny they were. And that's a rifle. And that means that this guy had like this rifle. Like it becomes a real personal experience when you see these human things. Do you have things like that here?
Well,
because the Cold War is such a big thing.
Well, and that actually that helps us, right? Because if you're talking about sports, space race, there's so many different ways to connect. And if we're not connecting, it's because we're not doing our jobs. Because there's always something. And the way that I look at it is it's like a vessel, right? So it's like if it's filled up with your experiences, then you have a direct relationship, especially if it's like you live that past. So you remember what happened, it was a transformative time in your life. That vessel's filled with those with that. So the history of it. But what happens is that, you still come with a vessel if you don't have that information or background. It's just filled up with other stuff that you can tap into. So, for example, our Berlin wall pieces, I found out recently, one of the hottest spots for the Korean community to take engagement photos in front of all things. It's on all kinds of lists. Well, you can look at it because it's a colorful backdrop. It's a good place to take pictures. But Korea, there's North and South Korea. It's like there's another way to connect these things together. And they may not know about 89. They may not know about Berlin, but they certainly know about walls. And so they fill up that vessel with their own experiences. So it's up to us to find out how to fill it.
But a lot of the interviews that you do, and I haven't heard any of them yet. I went to there's a new museum in Santiago, Chile called the Museum of Human Rights.
Yeah.
It's some kind of a modern building, and you walk in there, and as soon as you walk in, there's just like a big screen showing these iconic images of the jets flying over Plaza Moneda. That kind of image that you saw with Allende. And so it wasn't heavy with stuff. A lot of it was like a visual auditory experience when you went in there and you kind of walked through and you walked through little caverns. There's a lot of pictures, but there were a lot of voices and people telling what happened or what happened to them, which I couldn't really understand. But one of the things I want to ask you is the difference between an experience and a story with some of these people that you talk to and their accounts. And one of the things that's cool about this museum is it's called The Change. Right.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
There's a change. People are going to be different before. Everybody's going to be different before and after. So you've got an instant story machine here, right? And is that kind of generally how you're looking at these stories as they come in, or are you just sort of collecting experiences, or simply I was a border guard or whatever?
Well, again, look, I know oral histories are important to museums to tell the story of what happened, and I think that's valuable. We're a little different in that, again, to get at how people are and human responses to experience, is that it goes back to the founding of this museum. And I remember explicitly this moment when I was conducting oral histories for my grad school work in England. And this was looking at Checkpoint Charlie. And it became very clear very quickly that the stories I was listening to were not only filled with different opinions about what the wall meant and what, why they were there, but the facts were totally different. That like the history of the wall, how it happened. And it felt like, look, this is something that should be so clear, right? The whole world is watching this wall, this division between East and West, the tanks facing off. Like, surely we can agree on that. But even then, you know, the way they told their story were colored through this lens. And it was like, whoa. Like, I think that's fascinating. And it's even more of a reason to collect oral histories, because if you think that they all tell the same truth, you only need a few of them, right, to communicate your message. Yeah. But if you think there are conflicts and contradictions, that this is something that needs to be worked out, you need more of them. So I think we're probably even more committed to it than other institutions are, because we're interested in how the stories diverge. And I'll tell you, it happens all the time here. Every week somebody comes in and it's like, no, it happened just like this in this way, and literally like 5 minutes later somebody like, no, it happened exactly like this. I was there and I saw the whole thing. And so recording those stories is like amazing. So we will look at specific times and places, like the border on this date, and there'll be like 10 people, and the stories are like, some of them will kind of be vaguely the same, and some of them are like, no, this is a totally different thing, right? You know, and again, it just makes me think, like, how do I talk about my past? Like, how do I talk about my history here? Like, one side story. So, like, I was asked to do a review of a story of the history of LA at the Natural History Museum. This is when it opened a couple years ago. And I think it's very LA, by the way, that there's no museum of LA history, of course. Like, we are ourselves an example of that.
We're throwing it away ourselves.
Well, no, but I mean, we are all like, we're like, what is our history? I mean,
it's that little shop on La Brea just north of Wilshire that sells all those old signs. You know, the crazy plastic dinosaurs.
That's right. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, all like the Elvis bust there. Yeah. That's our museum of history.
Well, yeah, but and that's a great example, because look, I mean, it's all just like a hodgepodge, and that's what I love about this place. You know, it's all kind of like different stories that interlap and intersect. And what I was saying is, like, I realized going through this review process, I'm like, I am the worst person to do this because I turned into, so I get it. I turned into one of those. I'm like, no, it totally happened like this. We never played with that in the 80s. Like, our toy was this. And then I realized, like, I was a kid growing up, you know, in West LA. Like, I'm not going to have the reality and truth of some kid from East LA that has a totally different view, different culture, different language. And, you know, it's like, they're all true, but there's not like one way to tell that story. And I realized, like, I was doing the same thing, and I was like, of all people, I should know this. But it's such a human desire to do it.
So what are the walls in LA? The 405, the 110? What are they?
Yeah, I mean, I think
you have. I mean,
you have to. Yeah, I mean, you got to start with that. But look, I mean, look at the history of the 10. I mean, the 10 freeway carved up neighborhoods, and depending on kind of who fell on what side, kind of puts you in a different place. There are all kinds of the Chavez Ravine is another one.
Oh, sure. I was just thinking about that.
Just carved up, and so where these things were carved up, how it was done. It tells you a lot about the history of LA. We have a lot of, I mean, you got to talk about not only the physical walls, but invisible walls, you know, the socio-economic walls between different places in LA. There are gated communities.
Absolutely.
Those are also kind of walls, right? They're like, they're securing themselves against whatever's out there. Yeah, man. I mean, these are you know, we know walls here.
Well, I had to throw one more thing in while we're on that subject. I had an acting teacher, right? He said, when you go to a meeting with somebody, start out saying something obvious, right? That's demonstrably provable to everybody in the room. Okay. So they trust you. It's like, so it would be, you've got a microphone with a tripod sitting in front of you right now. Right? It doesn't make any sense.
Just to kind of get like, you're
right. So you can agree on something, you're on the right page. But do you find that your interviews as like an oral historian as well, do you find, that's kind of word oral historian, but do you find it different between somebody holding an object and telling a story, or when somebody's just kind of telling a story from memory?
Well, I think objects and look, I think objects have huge significance on us. That's why there are museums, right? I think there's a neurological connection that happens when we interface with things. That's why architects do what they do. They create spaces in which people live. There are walls and artworks on the walls. I mean, I think all of these form to some degree who we are, and I think they also trigger memories, they trigger responses, and they impact our behavior. I'm thinking of the communalkas. These were buildings in Khrushchev's Russia that were basically built with the top of the wall had an inch or two gap, and the reason was so you can hear the person next door, to kind of reduce the idea of privacy.
Like a cubicle.
Yeah, but planned so that like basically you didn't feel like you could have a quiet discussion with somebody, that the threat that you could sort of always be heard. But I just want to make the point that, we are affected by spaces and things. And we participated in a project a couple years ago where we just filmed people's hands. There are two filmmakers that did this. And they were holding a piece of the wall and telling the story.
I was in that show.
Yeah,
I was one of the people they interviewed.
Yeah, so
my hands were hamming it up though.
Yeah,
I knew the camera was just at my hands, so I'm going like this.
So
that.
Down. Yeah, no, and that's a great example. So firsthand, and that's what you see is like people either have a very strong response to it, or it's literally like I got this. Somebody gave it to me once. I lost touch with them, but it's a piece of the wall, and I feel guilty if I throw it away. Or it stands for hope and freedom, or it stands for my family. So you just see how even just one thing, it's almost not a wall anymore. It's like a provocateur of memory,
right?
And that's what the wall has become. It's not, it used to be a thing, and it used to divide people, but now it's a symbol for what people want it to be. There's a sort of an imposing of meaning on a thing, and it is like you said, Mark, it's like people will always start out with this is a piece of the wall. That's assuming it's not fake, which a lot of them are, you can agree on that, and then it goes on from there. And so that's a reference point for people, and I think that people respond to things.
You have such a unique story to tell here, and I'm always curious on how you try to decide these things. When I go out, work overseas, I work at the village level, and I talk to people locally, so I'm ground truth all about it all the time. So you have a lot of people that have this visceral connection to what the history is, but then you also have, the very macro version. Like if you were to ask people like, what is, describe for me in 200 words or less the Cold War, like we couldn't even decide when it started.
Right.
Is it when Churchill makes his speech? Is it during World War II? I've read books when they're like, oh crap, this other war is starting.
Well, is it still on now?
Right. Is it still on now? So these
it's
macro and micro intersections, how do you draw those chords together and say this is what the macro is without making it your own perspective of what all of this is?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to just be upfront about that, right? We can say the collections are factually from 1945 to 1991, but that's just a starting place. That's not the end. And then the question I would turn back as well, here's some reference points, here's some background, but like, when did it start?
Yeah.
And is it still going on? And what do you think? And here's some information that we have now from how Russians see things. You know what I mean? It's like, so depending on what the context is and where you're coming from. And I think, look, that's what makes this interesting, right? Because if this were all settled, if this was 19th century France or something like that, I'm sure it's important. We can learn from it, but we would be able to say, we collectively now know, or this is what we think, here are the important dates, there's a beginning, a middle, and end. This has not worked out yet. And I think I'm very, this is where a museum like ours has a role to play, not only in recording the history, but in observing and interpreting the way that the history is being made, because it's not finished yet. And, and to your point, it's like we can't even agree on the dates yet. So there's no blueprint for what we do, like I said. And this is definitely, this is an historical laboratory. That's why we do what we do, and what gets us out of bed in the morning.
one of the ways it's still going on is the legacy of people that have served in the military. Our foreign policy, our defense policy is still run by people who have a Cold War spirit inside of them. So I kind of use it as a mocking thing, but the U.S. Army always wants to line up tanks in the Fulda Gap and get ready for the Russians to come. Right. And that's how we build all of our defense. Yeah, the fight we fight in reality is these small, counterinsurgency type fights. So we still have all these people that are leading our foreign policy military effort, waiting for the Russians to fight, and there was never any break of the tension. That tension has stayed there for them. Like, they're always ready for us, and so it still impacts how we do things. It's an incredible thing to think about. When does the Cold War, or if the Cold War ended, when did we realize it and actually go, yeah, that's not a thing anymore?
Well, now we got North Korean missiles, and we have missile defense again. It's like super 80s.
Yes,
like retro, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You said you found some stuff from the Stasi. Somebody dropped off some spy stuff. Or, Do you have a relationship, obviously, with Dagmar? And what is the relationship between you and the BSTU, the Stasi files?
Well, I think all the different organizations that deal with this have to work together. Some are more willing than others. Dagmar Hofstedt, who's a longtime friend of ours, represents probably one of the most important institutions of this history that there is. The sort of repository of, when you see those photos of miles and miles of archives, these are the documents from the secret police. And now they are even getting to this question of, well, what do you do with this history in the future? So they're creating a democracy campus to sort of take the history as a reference point and then build on it, about the role of transparency and democracy. How do you build one? What are the tools that you need? And so these are the kinds of discussions that we're having right now. And we are thrilled to work with people like them who kind of get it and are trying to work together.
I think she was talking about they're turning the entire stuff. I mean, the Stasi headquarters was a huge compound. It's like the Fox Hills Mall down here. It's just like it. It's just like
without
it.
The towers.
But this I think it's Nonnenstraße is what it's called. But they're going to turn that entire compound is being turned into like an institute.
And that place is like right out of. I mean, that is a time capsule too. If you go in there, all the desks, as you said, are kind of like have that thing, and it's all filled with East German artwork still, and it's a crazy place. But
IKEA furniture too.
Somehow.
I don't know how that worked. How'd they get IKEA in 1970s?
They always had a thing for the Swedes.
The Dutch stuff or the Swedes?
They always wanted to imagine themselves as like the Eastern Swedes. I think this was always part. Yeah, and like stylistically, and because it was all the minimalist,
all the wood.
No, they had that same thing, and all the leaders drove Volvos.
Oh, they
from
did.
the SED. They drove Volvos. That was like their luxury car.
What is a Viking thing? Maybe I don't know. They got it back.
I don't know. They were like a kind of social.
Bauhaus
democratic
was kind
socialism,
of
so it was sort of the one country
minimalist
in the West. Minimalist, clean line. So there's some relationship there. But Mark, I want to ask you, so you've heard all this stuff now. What do you think about, what is your experience and memory in terms of because you saw it at the Venda, which is the name of the museum,
right.
The change. What did the change look like through your eyes?
Well, I lived in the western, obviously the western part of Berlin. I was in the American sector. Had a little apartment. I was working at this unit it was an engineer unit at an old. It had been a Prussian military academy. Then it was the SS headquarters. Now it's the German National Archives. Right, but that's where I was. That's where I was working. This old red brick building. And
I know that building.
And I remember the first time I was there, I went for a little jog, maybe 300 meters down the road was this little canal, and this is kind of nice. And I'm jogging along, and there's a tower and a guy with a Kalashnikov variant kind of looking down at me. And I thought, oh, this must be obviously the Berlin Wall, right? Wow. But it was just the other side of the canal. Really, is all it was. The canal was about as long as this room, wide as this room. So that was my first experience. But when the wall came down, I just got a phone call late at late at night, like 4:00 in the morning. A friend of mine said, "Hey, you got to come down here." So yeah, I went down, and a lot of people didn't really believe it was happening. A lot of people in the West didn't believe it was happening. I think most people thought, yeah, right, the wall's coming down, forget it. Not only that, there were a lot of people in the West weren't too excited about it in West Berlin.
Yeah.
A lot of the excitement built up, I felt, in the following 3 or 4 days when other people from outside of Berlin came in to see what was going on. But the actual Berliners themselves were like, oh, they could see what was happening.
And they're like, "Are we gonna have to pay for all this?
God, we gotta pay.
I have to wait. The traffic's gonna be awful."
Yeah. I mean, the first thing, the thing that struck me is just this wide-eyed. I still remember the joy of people coming through, like the fissures of the gate or the openings of the gate when they let people through. There was just this wide-eyed sort of this physical feeling, this elation that people were feeling as they're just walking
Did you
around.
talk to them? I mean, did they know you were in the
We
US
talked,
Army?
yeah. Oh,
Like,
yeah. We would bring, I used to go with a friend of mine. Even the first week was all just a big party. We would bring lawn chairs and just sit there. And people would come through, and we would just talk to them and have pop some champagne, and they'd say, "You're the first Americans I've ever met." And
what do they say? Not only were you from the U.S., but you're a soldier. What was their response to that?
That was I don't think the soldier thing wasn't a big deal. The soldier thing was probably a bigger deal with the West Germans because they're like, "I didn't understand, why do you want to kill people?" but the East Germans, they kind of got it because they had like a mandatory service. They said, "Oh, you're doing your time."
Yeah,
because I remember the night that it came down, it was like early in the morning. It was like dawn because I walked a little bit farther north of the Brandon Brigade toward the Reichstag. I think my geography is right, but anyway, at that point there was there was a fenced version of the wall because it was like a little gate or something there. And I remember just walking up, and there was an East German guard there, just smoking a cigarette. And I just walked up and, asked him if he had an extra cigarette, and he's like, yeah. And he hands one over, and we smoked and just kind of talked about it. I was like, what's it like over there right now? He says, oh, it's crazy. We just don't really know what's happening. Everybody wants to go and see the West. Everybody wants to go and see it, it was interesting. You see all these people coming through, but then the next morning or the next day, there was another throng of people coming back in the other direction to go back home.
The waves.
Everybody kind of crashed.
And did you go in one of those waves? I mean, did you go to the East and...
Not that night,
check it out?
No, we weren't allowed to go over. They said to the Americans, forget it. The soldiers, at least, don't get caught over there for a while. So we couldn't go over there for a bit.
But
I remember
you eventually made it over.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I eventually made it over. Yeah, it was still pretty much the same. Things didn't really change very quickly. I mean, there was still people didn't really trust it. There was this whole wall thing, and some people thought, oh, it's going to go back to normal.
Come back at any time.
And it's going to close it up again.
Yeah.
But for me, it was a pretty wild experience to be there watching that. And also for Americans there, so much of our mission was, fighting the Cold War. We're demonstrating. So a lot of us sort of there's a transition. It's like,
now what?
I guess I could leave now, right? I guess we can go. We can go somewhere else.
I mean, so you had a feeling this was, being on the ground, being there, you had a feeling this was a historic moment.
Oh, absolutely.
Like pretty immediately.
Pretty immediately we realized, because I got there and I started, oh wow, I got to get a piece of this. I heard the little chisels, and it takes so long to get a piece.
Did you do that? Did you take?
I was one of the little pickers, yeah. And then you climbed
pickers.
up on top of it, and then you climbed back down and picked for a while. And I remember there was a cherry picker that came down, kind of like this thing that just came down in front of the Brandenburg Gate, and out jumps this guy in a trench coat, Dan Rather, and I had a little piece of the wall I just chopped. I was like, you know what? He probably doesn't have time to chip away at this. So I kind of made it through I was like, Mr. Rather, and a couple of his bodyguards, of course, see me, and they're like, I was like, dude, I'm American. Let me talk to him. So they let me up to him, and I said, Mr. Rather, and he's like, yeah, I was going to help you. I said,
That's good, Dan Rather.
Here's a piece of the wall.
Yeah.
For you. He's like, well, thank you very much. Put it in his trench coat and walked away.
I wonder if he still has that. We should track him down.
I wonder if he still has it. It's Dan Rather.
That would be good. Yeah. Do you remember that guy? That would be a great story. But you must have had, so I know the building that you were in because I did my archival research there for like a year.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I was in that building.
The
Bundesarchiv Lichtenberg West. One of the things that occurred to me is being there all the time is like the phases of history this place has gone through. Well, you were a soldier there. Did you sense like what a crazy thing this is? Like you're based in a building that was originally from the imperial time, the Kaiserzeit, as they call it, to Weimar, to the Third Reich, and it was like an elite unit in the Third Reich, and then you. I mean, does that like and a total different change? The U.S. Army comes in and takes it over. I mean, did you like look around ever like this is crazy?
Just that one barracks, Andrews Barracks, is pretty interesting because it has. There's another McNair is the much bigger one. That's where all the infantry units were, and then the armor were farther down near the park, and so we were all kind of split up into these little bases. But Andrews, when I got with all the American sector, it started to feel like a little American village after a while.
Yeah.
But even though you looked at it and you realized, these aren't really our houses. We kind of got them from after the war. And there was a little guilt involved there. Like, I don't think we really should be having that great of a time here.
Guilt or like, who was it that lived in these weird places?
Yeah, well, there was.
I mean,
and there was near Oscar-Helenheim, there's a U-Bahn stop called Uncle Tom's Hütte.
Yeah.
And right down that street, there's these row houses, and I used to jog by them all the time. There's these little mountain houses stuck out there. They're kind of these cute little places. And that's where all the higher-ranking SS officers used to live. And I thought, this is fascinating.
Well, and Andrews, what I always thought was crazy about this place was that if you look around, so many of like the remnants are still there. Like you wouldn't see a swastika, but you'd see like the eagles around, and like when you go for the front brick gate, it still has like you could see where it was. It's like ripped. It's been ripped off of where the brick is.
Yeah, we used to go. I used to play rugby. We go play in Nuremberg, but we go play in the Olympic Stadium in Nuremberg, where he gave the big speech. So you could literally see where the swastika had been. And
Tempelhof, where the where you had the the airstrip there. It still has like
Andrews was wild, but Andrews was wild though because where we kept our motor pool used to be the stables for the cavalry, right? And they would kind of march by, and they still had a kind of a parade field there as well.
Oh yeah.
And and there was this one wall near the pool in the front where there was some little chips in the wall, and it's like, this is where Hitler executed the SA and the original brown shirts, and then the SS came in and took over. So they kind of wiped out the that was originally the SA headquarters. And then they killed. Imagine having two secret services. Yeah. And one was like, I don't trust you guys. So they just shot all their.
officers. You're like living in that space, and it must be a reminder sometimes. I mean, I often, being here in LA, you watch these films, and I watch it with my wife, and you just like these World War II films, and it seems like from another time, another place. And you lived around it, so you saw the holes in the wall.
Yeah. Yes.
And it must be a reminder of like, this is not some abstract thing. This is not some film like this happened here.
Yeah. Great swimming pool though. I don't know if you used that. It was fantastic. I used to go there and swim at lunch. And then in the back there was an area where you could work on your cars. There's the back lane. Now it's like a little Audi or something, or a little shop back there. There's like a gate that goes across, but it's cut off. But it was part of Andrews Barracks. But back there was a motor pool, and there was a guy who worked at that motor pool, and they called him the Turk. And he was the one. He was like an auto mechanic. He'd help the Americans fix work on their cars. Sure. I'd heard of him, but I never met him. Well, the Turk was the guy who was the contact with the East Germans for James Hall, who was probably one of the biggest spies from. Yeah. So you had at Andrews Barracks, you had all the guys who worked at Teufelsberg. So you had all the analysts that were living there. So I look back at it now, I think that place must have been crawling with Stasi.
Oh
because
my gosh!
They were the low hanging fruit. They were if you get a young guy that worked at Teufelsberg, you could get him to like give some information and so forth. And then I found out, and this is just recently, a few years ago, this unit's been deactivated, called Detachment A. So there was about 100 special operations troops that were just right there in Andrews Barracks as well. But these guys all wore civilian clothes all the time.
Yeah.
They let their hair grow, and they try to blend into the...
And as I think I was mentioning to you, Mark, we have a special collections librarian who was a Teufelsberg guy who listened in on phone calls in the East. And he was listening in, for example, for the Border Command. And he's one of the ones that it's just funny how history is. Like, he reached out to some of the border guards and reconnected with them, and now they're like really good friends.
It's bizarre,
like the guy, he was like they were spying on each other, listening into their phone calls. So he felt like he knew him, right? Because he heard him all the time.
Wow,
yeah.
Cool.
So he can like know, but like he ask about like his wife and and all these crazy things. So
you knew so much about him in a weird way. Kind of
I mean, a lot of these guys,
sort of like the lives of others, but
right,
American.
right. Well, a lot of these guys were listening into phone calls, and they knew so much about these people that when the wall fell, it's like you feel like you run into them, you're like, hey, I know you. I bet that happens to you, Mark. People have seen the show and they're like,
oh,
I feel like I know you, right?
Yeah, I know you.
It's like the character. It's what is it?
Yeah,
it's not you.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, but that's and when did you finally leave? When were you done with your?
I was done. I finished in 92, but I hung around and lived on couches and went to acting class and did. I worked on Tatort. You know what I mean?
That's
I
one
did
of the
it.
big shows.
Somebody because I knew a casting director and they said, Mark, you got a job on Wim Wenders' film.
Wow.
The sequel to Himmel über Berlin.
Yeah.
And I said, really? And they said, yeah. So this woman came to my house and went through my clothes and said, you'll wear this, this, and this. And I showed up. It was more or less an extra who got cut. But so I just started my acting career in Germany at that time. And then I left like in 93. So.
If you stayed, you could have been like the Hoff. You could have been big in Germany.
I could have been huge in Germany.
Could have been huge in Germany.
But thank God I had a German teacher who says, I can't believe this. I had this American, and the class was in German, and I'd never taken an acting class before, but it was a method class, right? So this is like some intense, emotional and physical. I mean, talk about like objects, physical. These things bring up physical memories and so forth. And so it was a pretty intense class in Germany. And but at one point he said to me, "Yeah, Mark, you have to go with your people."
You have to go with your people, like your tribe.
It is time for you to go back to your people. It was like that became for me like a transition point, German director playing with his mustache, just saying, just it is time.
Well, then that's the opposite story of the Dean Reed story, right?
Dean Reed.
You were sent back. You came back to your tribe.
I was
left.
sent back. Dean never, because it's a cautionary tale. Look what happened to him.
Yeah, there you go.
Right,
it's good. It's good. You're this.
I made it good. Maybe he knew
there.
Dean Reed. I made sure he probably did at that point. I know this actor named Dean
I
Reed.
know.
He already did what you are doing, so don't even try to. And much better too, by the way.
And he sings.
He did 8 spaghetti westerns. You've done none of those.
Yeah.
Forget it.
I like it because usually, of course, it's the other way around. Like, you make it big there, then you try to get in the States. You're the other way around. You're just starting out there, but then you made it here.
Yeah.
So it's like
I couldn't go back.
No.
This has been great talking to you, man.
Yeah,
I
man,
really
it's
appreciate
fantastic.
your time. I love this museum. I've been here like half a dozen times, and every time I just want to kind of dig into the archives and get
You're
lost
welcome
here for a
anytime.
couple days.
You're like an honorary museum curator here at the Venda.
Tell the listeners how to find out about the museum, social media, all those things, so they can get to know you guys better.
The Venda Museum is spelled, it's Wende, so it's spelled the German way. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, www.vendamuseum.org, WENDE museum.org. We're going to be opening up this fall at 10808 Culver Boulevard. So if you're in the area, come and check us out.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll put links up to everything on the show as
Great.
well, too. So if you guys
Great.
can't remember or can't spell Venda, it'll be there. Just
Right.
click below Justin's handsome face, and then we'll be able to get you connected to those guys. But this is really, it's fantastic. This is a great conversation.
No, this has been great. Let's we should
Let's do it again.
do this again.
Let's talk again,
Let's
yeah.
just do it like a
Deal.
weekly thing.
What's going on?
All right, just hang out and,
Yeah.
and tell stories.
Yes.